The person you trust most could be the one planning your destruction. Right now, someone in your neighborhood is earning smiles from everyone they meet. They volunteer at the local community center. They help elderly neighbors with groceries. They show up to every town meeting with that perfect blend of concern and charisma that makes everyone think, now there is a good person. But what if that goodness is nothing more than a carefully crafted mask? Have you ever felt completely safe with someone who seemed too good to be true? Think about it for a moment. Do you have that one neighbor everyone loves? That volunteer everyone praises? The person who always knows exactly what to say, who makes you feel understood in a way that feels almost magical. Here is what law enforcement will not tell you. The most dangerous predators are not the ones lurking in dark alleys. They are not the obvious threats your parents warned you about as a child. The most dangerous predators are the ones who have mastered the art of being exactly who you need them to be. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, 76% of serial killers are described by their communities as charming and helpful. 63% held positions of trust or authority. These are not random statistics. They represent a chilling truth about human nature and the masks we allow people to wear. The problem is not just that predators hide in plain sight. The problem is that we have been conditioned to equate charm with safety, kindness with trustworthiness, and community involvement with moral character. We mistake charisma for compassion, and that mistake can cost lives. What if I told you that charm can be the deadliest weapon in a killer's arsenal? What if I told you that the very qualities that make someone seem trustworthy are the same qualities that make them capable of unthinkable evil? In the quiet town of Raven Hollow, a man named Dorian Vale spent years perfecting this deadly deception. By day, he was everyone's ideal neighbor. By night, he was something else entirely. His victims never saw it coming because they were looking for a monster, not a man who brought them homemade cookies and offered to help with their landscaping. If you want to learn how to spot these hidden predators before they strike, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, we dive deep into cases that will teach you to recognize the warning signs that could save your life or someone you love. Because here is the truth they do not want you to know. Your gut feeling might be the only thing standing between you and becoming someone's next victim. The question is, are you listening to it? Raven Hollow looked like something straight out of a postcard. Tree-lined streets wound their way through neighborhoods where children rode bicycles without fear, and front doors remained unlocked well into the evening hours. The local coffee shop knew everyone by name. The hardware store owner would drive tools to your house if you could not make it in before closing time. This was the kind of place where people moved to escape the chaos of city life, where families planted roots with the confidence that their children would grow up safe, surrounded by neighbors who genuinely cared about one another. The crime rate was practically non-existent. The biggest scandal in recent memory involved a dispute over property lines that ended with both neighbors sharing a beer and laughing about the misunderstanding. At the heart of this tranquil community lay something truly spectacular. Thousands of acres of pristine woodland that stretched far beyond the town limits. These forests were Raven Hollow's crown jewel. Hiking trails meandered through ancient oak and pine trees. Crystal-clear streams bubbled over smooth stones. Families would spend entire weekends camping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The woods were where couples went for romantic walks, where teenagers held their first awkward conversations about love, where stressed adults found peace after difficult days. Local real estate agents sold homes by emphasizing proximity to these natural sanctuaries. Wake up to birdsong, their advertisements promised. Step outside your back door and enter paradise. But here is what nobody understood about paradise. It can become a prison just as easily as it can provide peace. The same isolation that made Raven Hollow feel safe also made it vulnerable. The same forests that offered beauty and solitude also offered something far more dangerous, the perfect place to disappear someone without a trace. Miles upon miles of dense woodland where screams would be swallowed by wind through the branches, where secrets could be buried so deep that spring flowers would bloom over them for decades. Community trust, the very foundation that made life in Raven Hollow so appealing, created blind spots that a predator could exploit with surgical precision. When everyone knows everyone, when everyone trusts everyone, when everyone assumes the best about their neighbors, it becomes almost impossible to recognize when someone among you is pretending to be something they are not. The people of Raven Hollow prided themselves on their ability to judge character. They believed that living in such close proximity to one another meant that nobody could hide their true nature for long. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong. Because predators do not just hunt in dangerous places. They hunt where their prey feels safest. They understand that a person who believes they are completely secure will let their guard down in ways that make them incredibly vulnerable. Dorian Vale understood this better than anyone. He had spent years studying his community, learning its rhythms, identifying its weaknesses. He knew that the very thing that made Raven Hollow special would also make it the perfect hunting ground. But perfection, as the town was about to learn, was just a mask. And masks, no matter how beautiful, always eventually slip. Dorian Vale was 42 years old when he perfected the art of being two completely different people in the same body. By day, he was the kind of man every community dreams of having as a neighbor. He owned a successful landscape architecture business that transformed ordinary backyards into stunning outdoor spaces. His designs won awards. His client testimonials read like love letters. Every Tuesday evening, Dorian volunteered at the community center, teaching basic gardening skills to anyone who wanted to learn. He would arrive early, stay late, and never accept payment for his time. Giving back is what makes life meaningful, he would tell people, flashing that warm smile that made everyone feel like they were his closest friend. Weekends found him at local charity events, always ready to donate his services for a good cause. He redesigned the library's garden for free. He created a memorial garden for families who had lost loved ones. When the local school needed help with their outdoor classroom project, Dorian worked for 3 weeks without charging a single penny. But what nobody knew was that these acts of generosity were not random kindness. They were reconnaissance missions. Every interaction gave Dorian access to personal information about potential victims. Every conversation revealed vulnerabilities he could exploit later. His selection process was methodical and chilling. Dorian specifically targeted men who were isolated, struggling, or going through difficult transitions in their lives. He had an almost supernatural ability to identify loneliness, a recent divorce, a job loss, the death of a parent, depression, addiction recovery. These were not coincidences to Dorian, they were opportunities. Mason Troy, the schoolteacher, caught Dorian's attention during a parent-teacher conference where Mason mentioned feeling overwhelmed after his mother's death. Noah Carter, the artist, became a target when he spoke openly about his struggles with social anxiety at a gallery opening. Each victim was carefully chosen because their emotional state made them desperate for connection, understanding, and hope. Dorian's manipulation began with what psychologists call love bombing. He would shower his targets with attention, validation, and promises of friendship. He studied their interests and became exactly what they needed. If they loved art, Dorian suddenly developed a passion for painting. If they enjoyed hiking, he knew every trail in the county. If they struggled with confidence, he became their biggest supporter. The transition from friend to predator was so gradual that his victims never recognized the danger. First came innocent invitations for coffee, then longer conversations about life and dreams, then offers to help with personal problems, then suggestions for private meetings in quiet, isolated locations where they could really talk. While Raven Hollow slept peacefully, trusting in the safety of their community, Dorian would drive the winding forest roads with his latest victim, talking softly about healing and new beginnings. His voice remained calm and reassuring, even as he led them deeper into the woods, farther from help, closer to the abandoned structures where his true nature would reveal itself. But here is what nobody saw coming. Dorian's greatest weapon was not his physical strength or his knowledge of the wilderness. His greatest weapon was his ability to make people feel chosen, special, understood in a way they had never experienced before. He gave them exactly what they were missing in their lives, and by the time they realized the price of that gift, it was far too late to escape. The most terrifying aspect of Dorian's psychology was not his capacity for violence, it was his patience. Some victims were groomed for months before he made his move. He would build trust slowly, deliberately, creating emotional dependency that made resistance almost impossible. Comment below and tell us, have you ever felt manipulated by someone's charm? Have you ever realized too late that someone's kindness came with hidden costs? Your experiences might help others recognize these warning signs before it is too late. Mason Troy was 34 years old when grief consumed his world. He had been teaching 5th grade for 8 years, known for his patience with struggling students and his ability to make mathematics feel like magic. But when his mother died after a 2-year battle with cancer, Mason found himself drowning in isolation. He had spent so much time caring for her that he had forgotten how to care for himself. His colleagues noticed the change immediately. The teacher who once filled the staff room with laughter now ate lunch alone at his desk. The man who used to organize faculty game nights stopped returning phone calls. Mason was desperately lonely, but admitting that felt like admitting failure. When Dorian approached him at a coffee shop near the school, offering condolences and a listening ear, Mason felt something he had not experienced in months: hope. Here was someone who understood loss, who did not try to fix everything with empty platitudes. Dorian spoke about healing through nature, about finding peace in quiet places. To Mason, those words sounded like salvation. Noah Carter dreamed in colors most people never saw. At 28, he was gaining recognition for his abstract paintings that captured emotion in ways that left viewers speechless. But success in art required connection, networking, putting himself out there, in ways that felt impossible for someone with crippling social anxiety. Noah's apartment was filled with masterpieces that nobody would ever see, because he could not bring himself to show them. Gallery openings terrified him. Art shows felt like torture. He created beauty in solitude, but yearned for someone who would understand his vision without judgment. Dorian became that person. He praised Noah's work with an expertise that seemed genuine. He offered to help navigate the art world, to make introductions that could change everything. For the first time in years, Noah believed his dreams might actually come true. Jeffrey Linton was a brilliant software engineer who had chosen isolation as protection from a world that often felt too loud, too chaotic, too demanding. At 39, he worked remotely, ordered groceries online, and found companionship through online communities where his intelligence was appreciated without requiring face-to-face interaction. But brilliance could not cure loneliness. Jeffrey craved genuine human connection while simultaneously fearing it. When Dorian reached out through a local hiking forum, discussing philosophy and technology with remarkable insight, Jeffrey felt understood for the first time in years. Brandon Reeves was the opposite of Jeffrey. Extroverted, optimistic, dedicated to bringing people together. At 31, he organized community events, managed volunteer programs, and genuinely believed he could make Raven Hollow an even better place to live. But Brandon's strength was also his weakness. His trusting nature and desire to see good in everyone made him blind to manipulation. When Dorian offered to help with an upcoming charity fundraiser, Brandon saw partnership, not predation. Each of these men shared something crucial. They were at vulnerable moments in their lives, seeking connection, understanding, or opportunity. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is human. We all experience periods when we need support, when we are open to help from others, when hope feels more important than caution. But predators study vulnerability the way scientists study diseases. They recognize the symptoms, identify the triggers, and strike when defenses are lowest. The final moments of trust, turning to terror, were not captured in any crime scene photos, but they live on in the memories of those who survived and the nightmares of those who investigate such crimes. The lesson here is not to avoid vulnerability. The lesson is to recognize when someone is exploiting it. Detective Malcolm Rivera had 23 years of experience reading people, solving puzzles, and following leads that others missed. But the disappearances in Raven Hollow tested every skill he had developed during his career. 4 men had vanished over 18 months, and Rivera could feel the connections forming in his mind even when the evidence refused to cooperate. The initial investigation hit wall after wall. Missing persons cases involving adult men often received less attention than other disappearances. The assumption was that these men had simply chosen to start over somewhere else. Mason Troy was dealing with grief. Noah Carter struggled with anxiety. Jeffrey Linton was a recluse by nature. Brandon Reeves was the only victim whose disappearance felt truly out of character, but even he had been under stress from organizing multiple community events. Rivera saw patterns where his colleagues saw coincidences. All 4 men had disappeared on weekends. All had been seen talking to someone described as friendly and helpful before vanishing. All had connections to outdoor activities or environmental interests. But when Rivera tried to pursue these connections, he met resistance from every direction. Budget constraints limited the investigation. Jurisdictional disputes slowed progress when evidence crossed county lines. The department prioritized cases with more obvious signs of foul play. Rivera found himself working the disappearances during his own time, following leads that his supervisors considered wasteful. The media attention made everything worse. Local news stations ran sensationalized stories about the vanishing men of Raven Hollow. National outlets picked up the story, bringing reporters who had no understanding of the community or the investigation. Every press conference became a battle between providing information and protecting the integrity of the case. Community pressure intensified with each passing week. Families of the missing men demanded answers that Rivera did not have. Town meetings turned into heated forums where residents expressed fear, anger, and frustration. Some blamed the police for incompetence. Others accused the media of creating panic. Everyone wanted someone to be held accountable for the growing sense of dread that had settled over their once peaceful town. Rivera's breakthrough came during his 5th visit to the abandoned boathouse deep in the woods. He had found the location through patient analysis of hiking trail maps and land records, looking for isolated structures where someone could work without interruption. The first 4 searches had yielded nothing, but Rivera trusted his instincts enough to keep returning. On a cold Thursday morning in November, he discovered what previous searches had missed: a small metal object partially buried under decomposing leaves near the building's foundation. It was a distinctive keychain that Brandon Reeves' sister had described during her missing person report. The keychain was engraved with a quote about community service that perfectly matched Brandon's personality. That single piece of evidence changed everything. Crime scene technicians returned to process the boathouse with new urgency. They found traces of blood that had been carefully cleaned but not completely eliminated. They discovered tool marks on wooden beams that suggested restraints had been attached and removed. They collected hair samples, fabric fibers, and footprint impressions that finally gave the investigation scientific foundation. Building the case required connecting dozens of seemingly unrelated pieces of information. Rivera worked with forensic analysts, psychologists, and community members to create a timeline of activities leading up to each disappearance. He interviewed hundreds of people, looking for the common thread that would identify their suspect. The work was exhausting, frustrating, and heartbreaking. Every day that passed meant another family wondering if their loved one would ever come home. Every lead that turned into a dead end felt like a personal failure. Rivera knew that somewhere in Raven Hollow, a predator was planning his next move while law enforcement struggled to catch up. Share this video right now to spread awareness about missing persons cases. Too many disappearances go uninvestigated because victims do not fit the profile that generates public attention. Adult men, people struggling with mental health, individuals from marginalized communities often disappear into statistical anonymity. Your share could help someone recognize warning signs or encourage them to report suspicious behavior. The clock was ticking, and Rivera could feel it with every heartbeat. The anonymous phone call came at 11:37 on a Tuesday night in March. Rivera was reviewing case files at his kitchen table when his cell phone rang with a number he did not recognize. The voice on the other end was distorted, clearly disguised, but the information was specific enough to demand immediate attention. "There is a cabin near the old Miller property, about 3 miles past the boathouse. Tomorrow night at 9 o'clock, he will be there with someone new." The line went dead before Rivera could ask questions, but every instinct told him this was the break they had been waiting for. The caller knew about the boathouse. They knew about timing that had never been released to the public. Most importantly, they knew that another victim was in immediate danger. Rivera assembled a small team within hours. They could not risk a large operation that might spook their suspect, but they also could not afford to let another person disappear into the woods. By 8 o'clock the following evening, 4 officers were positioned around the remote cabin, hidden among trees that had witnessed too many secrets. The mist rolled through the forest as darkness fell, creating an atmosphere that felt heavy with anticipation. Through night vision equipment, Rivera watched 2 figures approach the cabin from the main trail. One walked with confidence, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. The other moved hesitantly, occasionally stopping as though reconsidering his decision to be there. Dorian Vale looked exactly like the community volunteer everyone knew and trusted. Even in this remote location, even leading another victim toward isolation, he maintained the warm demeanor that had fooled so many people for so long. His companion appeared young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with how far they had traveled from civilization. Rivera waited until both men entered the cabin before giving the signal to move. The team approached from different angles, surrounding the building while maintaining radio silence. Through windows, they could see Dorian showing his guest around the interior, his body language still friendly and reassuring. The moment Rivera kicked open the door, everything changed. Dorian's mask did not just slip, it shattered completely. The charming community volunteer vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating that assessed escape routes with predatory efficiency. His victim, a 25-year-old graduate student named Alex Chen, stood frozen in terror as he finally understood the true nature of his situation. In that moment, the predator became the prey. Dorian bolted toward the back door, but Officer Martinez was already there. He tried the main window, but Sergeant Cooper blocked that exit. For the first time in years, Dorian Vale found himself trapped with no control over the situation and no way to manipulate his way to freedom. The standoff lasted only minutes, but those minutes revealed the monster that had been hiding behind community service and landscape design. Dorian screamed threats, bargained desperately, and finally broke down in a way that was both pathetic and terrifying. The man who had controlled every interaction for so long could not handle being powerless. His arrest was surprisingly quiet after the initial chaos. Once handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Dorian seemed to deflate. The fight went out of him as completely as his facade had crumbled. The confessions began during the drive back to town, fragmented at first, contradictory and self-serving, but containing enough truth to confirm what Rivera had suspected all along. Dorian spoke about feeling misunderstood, about needing control, about the woods being the only place where he could be his authentic self. Those confessions would continue for hours, revealing horrors that even experienced investigators struggled to document. Justice had finally found its way into the woods. Dorian Vale's trial became a media spectacle that transformed Raven Hollow into a destination for true crime tourists and legal observers. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, family members, and residents who needed to see justice served with their own eyes. For 6 weeks, the community relived its nightmare through testimony, evidence, and confessions that revealed the full scope of Dorian's crimes. The prosecution presented a methodical case built on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Dorian's own recorded admissions. Each piece of evidence told part of a story that was almost too horrific to believe. The defense argued diminished capacity, childhood trauma, and mental illness, but the jury saw through attempts to excuse the inexcusable. When the verdict was read, Dorian Vale was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of his victims wept, but their tears were complicated mixtures of relief, grief, and rage that would never fully resolve. Justice had been served, but it could not bring back Mason Troy, Noah Carter, Jeffrey Linton, or Brandon Reeves. It could not erase the trauma experienced by Alex Chen, who survived only because Rivera's team arrived when they did. It could not heal the wounds that would never stop bleeding in the hearts of parents, siblings, and friends who lost people they loved. The community worked hard to rebuild trust and normalcy, but some changes were permanent. Children were no longer allowed to play in the woods without adult supervision. Hiking trails that once attracted visitors became places people avoided. Real estate values dropped as families moved away, unable to find peace in a town that had harbored such darkness. Local law enforcement implemented new protocols for missing persons cases. Training programs now emphasized the importance of investigating disappearances involving adult men. Communication systems were improved to prevent jurisdictional delays. Community awareness programs taught residents to recognize grooming behaviors and manipulation tactics. The families of Dorian's victims found different ways to cope with their loss. Some became advocates for missing persons awareness. Others retreated from public life entirely. All of them learned that healing is not a destination, but a daily choice to keep moving forward, despite pain that never completely fades. The woods around Raven Hollow still whisper in the wind, but the secrets they hold have changed the community forever. Parents tell their children different stories now. Trust is given more carefully. Background checks are routine for volunteers and community leaders. Justice does not erase trauma, but it can prevent future harm. The price of evil is always higher than we want to pay, but the cost of ignoring it is infinitely worse. The case of Dorian Vale teaches us lessons that could save lives, but only if we are willing to learn them. First, trust your instincts. That uncomfortable feeling you get when someone seems too perfect, too helpful, too interested in your personal problems is not paranoia. It is evolutionary protection. Your subconscious mind processes thousands of microsignals that your conscious mind misses. When something feels wrong, pay attention to that feeling. Second, community vigilance does not require paranoia. You can be aware without being afraid. You can ask questions without being rude. You can verify someone's story without being suspicious of everyone you meet. Healthy communities balance openness with awareness. Third, support vulnerable members of society without making them more vulnerable. People going through divorces, dealing with grief, struggling with mental health, or facing financial difficulties need connection and help. But they also need protection from those who would exploit their circumstances. Check on your neighbors, but also check on who else is checking on them. Fourth, believe people when they report concerning behavior. Too many victims are dismissed because their concerns seem minor, or their reports seem incomplete. Mason Troy's co-workers noticed changes in his behavior. Noah Carter's friends saw him becoming more isolated. These were warning signs that were explained away instead of investigated. The responsibility for preventing future Dorian Vals does not belong only to law enforcement. It belongs to all of us. We must create communities where predators cannot operate freely, where victims are believed and supported, where unusual behavior is noted and addressed before it escalates. But we must also remember that evil often wears the mask of good. The person who seems most helpful might be helping themselves to opportunities you cannot see. The neighbor who knows everyone's business might be gathering information for purposes you cannot imagine. Subscribe to our channel and comment below. What safety measures do you take in your community? How do you balance trust with caution? Your insights might help someone else recognize danger before it is too late. Because here is the terrifying truth. The next Dorian Vale might already be gaining someone's trust right now. The question is whether we will recognize him before he strikes again.